Hi, I'm Erin Somerville at McCallum High School going over property. So the guiding question today, or questions, is about what are your rights to property, and then what are the limits to those rights? So when can the government actually take your property? Alright, so what we're going to do is, for our intro activity that we did in class, is we sort of had just a discussion over understanding what's property and what isn't. So we discussed, are you property? Can yourself be property? And ideas can get thrown around that you are property, during slavery, slaves were property. Or if you enter the military, that's your property of the United States government. Or if you are in prison, you could feel like you're property. For our definitions here, yeah, you are property. But the thing is you're a unique kind of property because you can only be owned by yourself legally. But it's the idea that your body is your property. So if a police officer searches you or wants to search you, the police officer will say, "May I search your person?" So they'll talk to you about yourself as if it is your property. May I search your car? May I search your person? But generally, we don't tend to think of people as property, but in law, you are property. You have self-ownership over yourself. What about your iPod? If you paid for your iPod, you bought it. But the music on it, do you own it? You might have paid 99 cents for a song, a couple dollars for a whole album, and it's now on your iPod. It is yours. You may listen to it while you go for a jog. You might listen to it while writing an essay. It is your music. But can you, if it's yours, turn around and sell it? So by asking this question about your iPod, we know you can buy an iPod and it's yours. And you could maybe turn around and sell that iPod so that somebody else owns it. But there are limits to your ownership of it. That iPod, how it is made, that is owned by Apple. And the music on it, while you can buy it for yourself, you cannot widely distribute that music because it is owned by the record label. So thinking about the sheet music to a song you compose. You write a song, you might own the paper that you paid for, you own the pen that you used, and you come up with your own song. That is yours. It's something that belongs to you because you created it. So now we have the idea of your own intellectual property, and we have intellectual property in your iPod. The guitar you play your song on, if you bought it, it's yours. But it might have a brand on it. It might be something that you could get in trouble if you tried to copy that make. The money you earn from your record contract. The money will be yours, but here's what happened to that song you made. That song that was yours now might be owned by the record label. So they'd give you money, but the rights to the ownership of the song that you made with your own sheet music and played on your own guitar might no longer be yours. And then the money that stations will pay you in the future to play your song, that money is yours, but the record label still owns the song. So property is not always clear-cut, and it can be very confusing. So we started off with that activity. Now I want you to go back and look at the Bill of Rights, particularly the 3rd, 4th, 5th, 7th, and 8th Amendments. What you're going to see is for each amendment, there's some reference to an idea of property. Sometimes the actual wording property is there, like you'll see in the 5th, it's written twice. But in the 3rd, 4th, 7th, and 8th, property is safeguarded. Your individual property rights are somehow protected from the government. I want you to go through and explain to me how each amendment safeguards individual property rights. I have an example here. The 3rd Amendment, the one about quartering, protects your home as property. So you have property in your home. How does the 4th Amendment protect your property? You have property in what, according to the 4th? How does the 5th Amendment? That's going to be at 2 places. The 7th Amendment, how does that protect your property? In this case, caution, it's not going to necessarily be protecting your property from the government. And then the 8th Amendment, in 2 places, you could argue that your property is protected by that amendment. So pause and do your best on that. Okay, so there was a handout that we're reading in class. It's called What is Property? Why Protect It? That's the first page. And then the second page is something we're doing a little bit. So this right here you should have printed up. and we read it as a class, and then for each section in the reading, I have a Roman numeral here, put 1 to 3 notes. So pause, read that, and for each Roman numeral, each title, take 1 to 3 notes. So now that we've looked at property rights in the Bill of Rights, let's zoom in on the Fifth Amendment, because that's the one that references private property twice. First, you have the Due Process Clause, and that is the idea that the federal government can take your life, liberty, and property. It just has to follow due process in order to do so. Same thing with your state government. It is made clear in the 14th Amendment, the first section of the 14th Amendment, that no state shall deprive you of life, liberty, or property without due process. The second clause, at the very end of the Fifth Amendment, which is kind of unrelated to the rest, because the Fifth Amendment largely is about criminal procedures. But separate from criminal procedures, you might be a law-abiding person in which the government takes your private property, and it can do so. This is called just compensation, the Just Compensation Clause. It's that last line in the Fifth Amendment. And it says that your government can take your private property. There are 2 stipulations in order to do so, is that the property has to be used for public use, so maybe they're taking your land in order to build a railroad or put a highway. But the idea is the government is taking it not to make a profit, but it's taking the property in order to provide a service to everybody. And secondly, you need to be compensated for it. And so that's why it's called just compensation, that you need a fair payment. Now, we understand just compensation to be whatever the current fair market value is. And the fair market value is what would a willing buyer pay to a willing seller. So now we're going to, as a class, we are reading about the Fifth Amendment. That's the second page that you printed up, and it's titled, How Does the Fifth Amendment Protect Private Property? So we popcorn read that as a class. Pause this and read that. And same thing, there were a few sections. We kind of skipped the first one because I went through it with you. But what's taking, what's eminent domain, just compensation, and if ideas are property. For each of those sections, do 1 to 3 notes. You can pause, do that. Okay. And finally, we have a scenario that I want us to look at, and I've uploaded it. So in class, we had 3 people to read the scenario. Look through it and pause while you read through that. Okay, so really can you think about the constitutional issue here? The Smith family, Lisa and Ted, both had property and they were excited to build on it. They did not build right away. They bought the property, years passed, and in those years other homes got built in the area. When they finally had their money set to build a small home for themselves, law had just been passed to limit building, because all those big homes that went up near the marsh looked like they were damaging the environment, that maybe there was some erosion that was threatening the marsh. So they were really frustrated because they were planning to build. They sat on this land. It is theirs. When it's your land or your property, you have the belief that you can do what you want with your property. But their contractor said at this point, it's your property, but there's a regulation in which you can't do what you want with your property. So, did the government take their property is the question. Is this a taking? And that is also what's going to be in the video. With this, it's not a taking because the government doesn't have the land, but you could say it's a regulatory taking. The government passed a regulation that essentially rendered the property useless, valueless, so that it couldn't be sold. So even though the land hadn't been taken, the Smiths couldn't use their land, and they couldn't find someone to buy their land, because who would buy land if it can't be used? So this leaves the Smiths in a really unfortunate situation, and the court has looked at these kinds of takings before, and we're going to watch a video about that. So I will either put a description of the video up if I can't get the video up myself.